right, the button has been clicked. So, this is Grassroots Economic Organizing live stream for September 11, 2023, our September live stream. Our topic for today is solidarity, economy, and transformation. Um, do some interviews or some introductions here first. My name is Josh Davis. I'm the content manager for Grassroots Economic Organizing. Chris, go.
Hey, Chris Preciado. I help with some of the tech. Sometimes I have an opinion or two. Go for it.
I'm Abe Griffiths. I'm a co-editor at GEO as well.
All right, everybody gets there. Got your applause there. Um,
Do it.
so, Abe,
Yeah,
why don't you start us off?
sure. Yeah, I'm really interested in this conversation. What you guys think? So really interested in talking about the solidarity economy and its its use for like transformative change. And I have some different questions that may help us in this discussion. But um, why I think it's important is especially in like radical left circles, I often just hear people argue over different like concepts of we should be doing this, we should be doing that, and people just have different like theories of change and what our ultimate goals are. So I have some different theories of change concepts I want to go over with you guys and see what your thoughts are. I want to talk about different ideas about cooperatives and the solidarity economy in use for like social and systemic change, you know? So um, that's the idea. Now, in historically, right, there are like five five different aims. This is according to Craig. I don't know Craig's first name. I didn't write that down, but it was written in 1980. But he basically talked about five different purposes for cooperatives. One is the original one, which is the cooperative commonwealth, which is the original ideology of the Rochdale pioneers. And the vision is that this school of thought that cooperatives grow and develop to embrace all fields and permeate all economic activities. The second idea is the cooperative sector, which is like the concept that cooperatives can coexist in the dominant economy. The third idea is cooperative socialism, which like sees cooperatives essentially as like a socialist institution that either supports a more centralized government or sees cooperatives as a superior form of socialization to state control. And then fourth idea is the school of modified capitalism, which sees cooperatives as a means to support capitalism and maybe improve upon it. And the fifth idea is like new age cooperativism, which sees like good society as one that replaces the monolithic organizations with a life oriented economy. So that was a lot right there, but we have different ideas like within cooperatives of like what co-ops are for, right? Some people see it as like a better form of cooperative of capitalism, and some want us to replace capitalism. Some think it's a better form of capitalism. And I guess besides like within our organizations, like we have to be on the same page if we're going to get work done, right? I think also as like in cooperatives, if we want to get to any of these larger goals, we have to strategize to get there, not just say, oh, one day, you know? So these are some of the starting ideas I have here. Just want to hear some thoughts from you guys about this first part.
So what's the difference between the cooperative commonwealth concept and the what you call the new age co-op thing?
Yeah, the new age. I, the idea that I mean, Craig puts it as like puts these things in time frames in his writings, but like new age is a
Okay.
newer idea of just it's it includes like a kind of social like a self transformation side to it, like care oriented side to it, you know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of where that
Okay.
new age cooperativism is
So
a little
all
bit
right.
different. Is it just has to do with like um, this is this is how we're going to work and support each other better.
So what's their question then? Is it like, I mean, which of those? I mean, obviously some of them are
Yeah,
have a more transformative kind of goal, the cooperative commonwealth or the cooperative socialism, as compared to making some minor adjustments to capitalism. Co-ops is a better form of capitalism.
what
So
yeah, what
um,
where do you guys personally kind of um what resonates with you, in what how you would like to see cooperatives, operate in the world?
I mean, I guess I'll go since nobody else seems to
Hey, can we have Matt on? Because we haven't tested
be talking.
Matt's mic yet.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Matt, turn your mic on and answer the question real quick. Can't hear you, Matt. Can't hear you. Can't hear you at all. Your mic is not muted. Um, so while Matt's figuring that out, um, I guess I'm certainly more drawn to the cooperative commonwealth, um, kind of concept. Although I don't know, I heard this Gramsci quote the other day about pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. And my intellect, when I think about, actually have like cooperativizing the entire economy or some large chunk of it, thinks that's not happening. That just is that seems so, such a long shot. Nonetheless, I think that I'd like that to be our goal and our mindset. I think in the day to day of working in a co-op, or you're probably not thinking about any of this, right? You're just, running your business. But I guess is kind of the motivating factor. I think that's, to me, that's what gets me going, is just the idea that we could, have more and more co-ops network together and be doing more and more stuff. And um, yeah, Matt is back. You want to try that mic again? So
Can it be your audio selection? Hear the mic symbol?
yeah.
Or do you have earplugs plugged into your phone? I mean, your computer?
No,
Okay. All right.
Matt will have to mime his responses today. Oh, there we go. Audio levels.
Um,
Yeah, turn it up a little bit more. Turn your mic up a little more. Yeah, Matt.
okay, can you hear me now?
We're good.
Can.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. So, yeah, this is funny. It's like to me, I have sort of two little things that I relate to this. One is when I visited Mondragon the first time, we're talking to a bunch of people. We're talking to a researcher at Mondragon University. Um, and it's my first visit there, just kind of trying to get a sense of where everybody, how they think about what they do. And I asked basically a version of this question, like, what's the goal? Like, how do you see things going? And basically I was asking them, well, essentially, like, is this project anti-capitalist? in some sense. And the researcher was, said, "Oh no, not at all, not in the least."
Yeah.
I was a little bit like, wow, okay. They were like, no, it's just one form among others. It's a better way to do business, was basically the model, was the answer. So that was interesting to me, because Arismendi Arrieta, who started Mondragon, was more anti-capitalist. Like he came in his time period, but also just who he was, etc. It was the idea of cooperativism was related to social transformation, meaning getting rid of capitalism. The other story is that I was driving at the Labor Notes conference with my friend Chie Matsumoto, who's a great freelance journalist and labor organizer in Japan. And she was trying to figure out, like, why this interest in co-ops, and that's why I said, well, to me, it makes sense that that's kind of where unions are going, right? Like you don't want to just always be bargaining with an employer who controls the whole thing, and you're just fighting over margins of how much power you might be able to have. You want to actually take over, right? Like, isn't that really what we're after? And so I was like, so cooperatives to me make a lot of sense. It's just kind of worker run businesses. And I remember she was very surprised by that answer, because she just hadn't thought of it that way. Because I think in the background that she came from and what she was familiar with as an activist, fundamental social transformation was not on the agenda. It was like very much in her personal motivation, but it wasn't anything that was really part of the strategy of anything that she did. Like, nothing was building social transformation in a real practical sense, even though it was motivated by that. And then in her political background, which she wasn't really involved in Japanese political movements, but many people she worked with were. And so they came out of the student New Left in Japan in the 60s and 70s. So very old school socialist revolution, state power model of social transformation. So again, kind of the cooperative thing was sort of a distraction from that point of view. It's like getting caught up in these petty day-to-day things instead of organizing to seize state power, which is what you have to do. So all that's just to say, like, for me, social transformation is like crucial. It's not necessarily intrinsic to cooperatives.
No.
They're just a vehicle, and they can be a vehicle that goes a lot of different directions, and they're not the only vehicle for social transformation. So, but they're important.
Yeah.
And
that's my long-winded answer.
There's also the framing of this when you sent your email out, Abe, and when I thumbnail the framing to me, I guess, was not just co-ops, but this solidarity economy, which is with co-ops being one part of that. But I think that has a more transformational, like fundamentally transformational aspect to it than just cooperatives. And ideal, I mean, and to me, that's even, any kind of cooperative commonwealth will include many things that might not, aren't worker co-ops or housing co-ops or food co-ops. They're, things like time banks and community gardens and stuff like this, and tool libraries and all that stuff. So I really think that's if we're looking for social transformation, we need to not just get constrained to just be thinking about co-ops, but all the other things and how we can connect them.
At St. Mary's University, Karen Miner and Sonia Nikopic write about, like, there being two different types of co-ops. And I would say there's a third one too, but like they talk about there being like co-ops that are like member oriented primarily, like they are mostly about member benefit and like about, filling in where like the market fails, like with monopoly or monopoly, everything like that. And the second kind of co-op that they talk about is co-ops with like a social or environmental impact focus that goes beyond the membership as well. But I feel like the solidarity economy co-ops are the ones that are like not just social and environmental impact, but like movement focused, place-based, and specifically anti-capitalist. You can want to do like social and environmental impact and not be anti-capitalist, you know, like. So I feel like that's to me the third type of co-op, and there's all the things beyond cooperatives that are the solidarity economy as well. Yes. So this one's an easy question, very straightforward question. So the Ani Institute has a framework for social change, right? And also I'm going to throw out both of these.
Which institute?
The Ani, Ayny. I guess I'm assuming that I'm pronouncing it right. Ayni Institute, and then they have their framework for social change, and then Eric Olin Wright, which they also quote, has a approach of like a framework for systemic change, and I think they are different: social transformation and systemic. But the first one is the three approaches to social transformation they put as personal transformation, like kind of like the be the change you want to see in the world kind of take on things, and the pay it forward. Then there's the changing the dominant institutions. I assume that they also mean like dismantling and the dominant institutions with that as well, but I'm not sure. And alternatives to the dominant system. So that's the social change approaches, and then the systemic transformation I would probably assume would be within the changing dominant institutions framework, which is just like in a non-academic framework.
Can we see the visual?
Wording. Yeah. You want to see the visual?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yeah. Please.
Can I share the screen?
You should be able to.
Okay. Here we go. All right. Can everyone see this, right? Let me just see if I can present. There we go. So this is social transformation approaches, right? Personal transformation, changing dominant institutions, and alternatives to dominant institutions, right? And the other framework, just basically taming the system, smashing the system, or escaping the system, which I would imagine the escape is related to the alternatives, but not necessarily, right? Like you can have an alternative that's not like an escape plan, right? Like, so to me, escape would seem like maybe a counterculture, or like trying to remove yourself from society, or like a dual power kind of thing of like you're building stuff up to replace the system, you know. But where do all of you kind of, what resonates with all of you? And I also don't think you have to do one and not the others. Like I think you could do more than one of these at the same time, you know. What approaches do you guys resonate with?
So if I'm understanding correctly, I would say alternative. I don't want to just modify some of the system, at least for the long term. And I think and definitely not escape, because this stuff catches up with you. I feel like that's one thing I've learned about like the housing situation, like getting involved in the tenant union stuff is, and connecting with other tenant unions throughout the country. We're seeing like this is not something we can escape. Really, like people got to dig in and fight. Um, and I guess there's this one quote out of the French Revolution. I think, I don't know, I forget the person. I wouldn't be surprised if they were a pretty terrible person as well. But I think they said like it can't be like a halfway revolution or something. It's like all the way, or you just like end up in the grave. And I do. It seems to me that is what happens if you look at these social transformations. That if they don't go far enough, they quickly degenerate, and then we end up in the same position we were in. A lot of stuff that we're complaining about today, people were complaining about it 100 years ago, even before that.
Oh yeah.
So would you also resonate with the smashing if you're talking about revolution, or?
Where we can win, yeah. If we can win, that'd be great. Though I know that it can't just be smashing, and that you got to be very careful about that, because I think a lot of systems they get powerful by those types of attempts. So you got to be very very careful about how you try to do that. And they you might think that you're the one who's doing the smashing, but you might actually be vicariously smashing for them in a way, which they're gonna get stronger.
Yeah, and I'll just mention on the tame smash escape kind of structure or way of thinking about this. There's Abe did an interview with Francisco Perez and Sarah Wong, I believe, from at the Economics for Emancipation course at the Center for Popular Democracy, I think, or something like that. So yeah, if you're interested in that, definitely go give that a read. So obviously these two kind of schemas don't really map onto each other one to one at all. Personally, I think, especially with this one, like we have to be pursuing all three of them at the same time, and maybe not each of us individually. I think each of us individually do need to be pursuing the personal transformation bit. Of course, we need to make sure that we don't fall into the old, like, oh, you just change yourself and everybody focus on themselves. But nonetheless, I think there does need, like, we do need to transform ourselves personally. We need to transform our values. We need to change our values. Was involved with like environmental and good government and consumer advocacy when I was in college, with Montpurg, with the Montana Public Interest Research Group. And it was really interesting watching, when I joined as a freshman, and I took several extra time to go through get my bachelor's degree. So I got to see like kind of generations of leadership in that organization, and just, the people. And, there were some people who they were all about it for a year or two, but, then they finished the law degree, and then and then they became a corporate lawyer, and so, a lot of the things, if we want to actually talk about social transformation, there's going to be some sacrifices there. I think that necessitates that, like, okay, well, if we're actually trying to transform things, that means we probably aren't just going to be living our lives in exactly the same way that everybody else who isn't trying to transform society does, right? And so, like, getting over our personal consumption lifestyles, our materialist lifestyles that we're just inculcated with from the day we're born. I think our individualistic attitudes that we have to an extreme degree here in this country, that kind of things we need to be working on. In terms of the dominant institutions, like, I'm not much of a, let's just try to reform things. Like, I don't put a whole lot of faith in that as a sole strategy, but but definitely, like, there are times when it's like, okay, there's something that, you know, we need to change right now. We can't get rid of the entire police force right now. That's not within our thing. That's not, you know, something we can do. But we need to do something. And so, you know, there is kind of a need as on, you know, I think sort of a, you know, emergency basis, almost, you know, like a triage type basis. Like, okay, we do, like, reform is something that needs to happen, and probably as a short-term solution sometimes that's what we'll need to do, but really what we want is the alternatives, ideally. So I think all three of those have to go together in any kind of truly transformative project. And as for the tame, smash, and escape, you know, I think we're trying to escape the capitalist system to the greatest extent possible. And if you can't smash it, I guess you have to tame it, which is, again, more of a reformism thing. But, you know, I don't know. That's where we get to, like, what Chris is talking about with the tenant unions. And I did, you know, I ran a staff the tenant landlord hotline for a couple of years, so I got pretty familiar with that, and involved myself in some of the legal side of it in terms of trying to change the laws, tenant landlord laws in the state, and just, you know, make some adjustments to them. And it's like, yeah, we're not going to get rid of, like, private ownership of property and rental properties and stuff like that. So we have to be engaging in the fight where it's happening, which might be in the legislature, you know, someplace where we'd prefer not to be, but we're gonna have to do that anyway. Rambling. But I do think that we get stuck, we do get hung up, and I remember this a lot from, again, my college days of getting into arguments with people in the Environmental Action Committee, or, yeah, that's what it's called, EAC, about, you know, because we were more reformists. We were, like, you know, going to the legislature and doing citizen initiatives and stuff like that. And they were hanging themselves off of logging trucks, you know, when they stopped at the stoplight so that they couldn't keep moving, stuff like that, direct action. And our thing, and I still believe it, was always, you know, diversity of means. We need a diversity of means. We need you guys doing what you're doing, but we also need people like us doing what we're doing, right? Like, it's not one way or the other. And I think it's the same way with this. You know, it's not that we just need people, you know, trying to smash the system, or, you know, it's like we need people doing all of it.
What are your thoughts, Matt? What sits with you there?
I guess I feel like the thing that I've found recently in the work I've been trying to do with folks is that some of these discussions, how would I say, like, people talk about different ideas of change or transformation, but the fundamental question is, who's going to do this? And so the collective organizing piece is often just not front and center. So I think this is I think the reason why I feel like working on regulations and changing policies, etc., feels so disempowering and so kind of like, you know, it's like a dead end, is because by itself it doesn't build people's collective capacity to do anything. And and if you focus all your effort there, you may not, it's not necessary, but it's quite possible that you won't put the effort into building autonomous collective power that you need to be able to do things, including to hold politicians accountable. Like, it's, you know, you can do a lot of different things, but all of them require collective action. They all require, and if they're going to be democratic and etc., then they require some very intensive sort of collective organizing work. And that's hard work, and it's work that people, I think, are unfamiliar with and don't necessarily want to do a lot of. And because it's just, you know, it's slow going and it's challenging. And one thing I like about cooperatives is that it's a very practical format where the collective activity is built in. Like, it's about collective activity. And so there's no avoiding it. And that's great. It gives people a chance to have that experience and build real power, even if it's on a very small scale or in a limited area. The power does belong to the people who are doing it. That seems very important to me.
Yeah, I wish that people saw like decision making in general, like in the workplace and in our housing, as like political power, beyond like political power just being, the voting booth, it,
Mhm.
I think that um, we make many more decisions, in our workplaces and in our housing than we do, in our voting, um, and I do think there is potential, for us to transform our political power by making more democratic societies. But but yeah, certainly getting people to think in those terms is something that's a you know continual work for us. But I do agree with Josh that like the three you know of like social personal transformation and alternatives and changing the dominant institutions have to happen at the same time. I do think that in terms of personal transformation, I don't know that I really resonate with the idea of like pay it forward, like, oh, if you do good, then other people will do good kind of idea. But like, I do think that by working together democratically, there is this kind of transpersonal aspect to it, right? Doing something with other people beyond yourself that is by itself a little transformative, but I
Yeah.
do wish that we did a little less replication of dominant institutions within cooperatives and mutual aid and everything like that. Like our workplaces don't have to look like other workplaces. We can do more personal transformation than doing another workplace, but adding the democracy aspect. Like we can
Yeah.
have relationships with the people that we organize with that are um, more fulfilling than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, so this personal transformation angle, this is a big one for me because I do think that like we don't as a group and just as people as individuals and then as groups of people who are expressly interested in making society a better place, we don't make use of the power that we have. We don't make use of the resources that we have. We don't think creatively enough about how to use the resources that we have in order to create the transformation that we want, because we get stuck in just our conventional ways of thinking about things and of thinking about our lives and of, that's again in the US, it's a very individualistic, you need to look out for yourself. You're trying to own a house, you're trying to own a car or two, you're trying to have a lot, a big balance in your 401k so that you can afford to, live after you can't work anymore. And when we're stuck in this mindset, which seems completely rational from our society as it is right now, like we're stuck and we're powerless because, like, well, so this, and I draw from my own experience, and this was kind of like my aha moment in my life when in 2000, at the end of 2004, I was, in Nepal getting ready to, after having taught English for 4 or 5 months, getting ready to come back to the US. And, this Hindu holy man guy asked me to, help him raise $5,000 to build a school. And I agreed and, started doing that. And I turned out I'm a crappy fundraiser. And so I ended up just like funding it out of my own pocket, even though I was working really low wage jobs. But I somehow managed to do it. And it was by just like, I'm just going to do it. I'm just gonna work. I'm just like, okay. And like, and my parents, my friends, and people would look at me like, you're crazy. Because there were several times, like in this 10-year period of me working on this project, um, when I would like get a paycheck for a couple $1,000, I'd have like $200 in my bank account and get like $2,000 from a painting job or something, and immediately send half of it away, overseas, which seems like crazy, but it's like I kept hoping people would pick up on this. Like, okay, I'm a janitor at the gas station. I'm building a school in Nepal. You dumb shits. You're making a six-figure salary. What can you be doing? Right? Like I try,
Yeah.
and so I was at the Unitarian Universalist. I was a UU at the time, and I was at a big GA in Portland, a annual General Assembly, and I tried. I said this to this room of people who are all there about how UUs can fight poverty, and it's like the Unitarians have the highest, like they're loaded like as a group compared to other denominations. And I was just like, look, if we're actually concerned with poverty, like, think about the amount of extra resources in this room. Like, seriously, like, we're always talking about what we can get other people to do. Who are we not like? We're not going out and like trying to find people who can fill up our extra rooms in our houses who need a place to stay. We're not, just being more, I don't know, being more creative and being more willing to do what seems like crazy things with what we have available to us right now that we can control, right? Like me doing the project in Nepal trying to help this guy build a school, it was the only thing, like what kept me going and why I stuck with it is because at least I could control it as compared to when I was working in politics and going to the legislature when I was in college and trying to get politicians to do the right thing. Good luck. This was something that's like, no, I have control over whether this happens or not. And I think as a group, as a movement, or as a bunch of people who all want to try to change things, I think if we were more creative and could do a better job of breaking out of our American mindset and like really, I don't know, just, I think that there are a lot more possibilities and that we don't even think about them a lot of times because we're stuck in our conventional ways of thinking. And so, yeah. So I think the personal transformation aspect is a big piece of it, right? It's certainly not the end all and be all, and it's not just be the change you want to see in the world, and that's good.
Right.
But it is fundamental, I think.
One story I like about personal transformation from the Virginia communes is that there are members of Twin Oaks and Acorn who were branching off and starting their own commune in DC with some other people, right? And they started the Compersia. And so their experience with Acorn and Twin Oaks was they have their own businesses. You could make tofu, you can make hammocks, you can do heirloom seeds. So someone can come with nothing and join these communities and have everything provided for them. They just have to put some labor in. But some of those members felt like people were getting like kind of stagnant, like they weren't working on themselves because everything was provided for, and there was a focus on the group, but there wasn't a focus on self-transformation, right? So when they started Compersia, they started this really, I think, really fun process, right? Like this that they do with each other that they called the call to greater awesomeness. So it even has like a funny name to it. But they had this process where they'd sit down with each other one-on-one. One person would get another person, and the other person would get another person that they'd sit down with. And they had these 4 questions. I don't remember all of them, but like some questions were like, what can we do to help you be more awesome? I just think that's so great. Like you're like just checking in with each individual, not just collective meetings, but like, seeing how you can help the person be more awesome, like more the person they want to be. in the community. I thought that was a really kind of cool process.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, more of that. More of that. Um, so this is really getting me thinking of it. So the um to me, so again, I'm really stuck on the personal transformation aspect, and I think why it's so important. It's not like I think that like if people I don't know engage do some kind of get some kind of personal transformation, have these aha moments that just will fix everything. But you know we need to, I think we get stuck when we think like, okay, if this isn't going to, whatever this action or whatever I'm going to engage in, if it's not going to have some big effect, or at least potentially have some like big effect, then it's probably not really worth doing. It's, is this really the thing? Maybe we should keep thinking about it and try and figure out, that thing that's going to really change everything. And that keeps us from doing things that might be small. It's not ending homelessness, but gave a homeless guy like a warm, safe place to sleep for a night, which, I've done on several occasions. And let me tell you, for them, that is a huge deal, right? I mean, it just all kinds of, little things that we can do just because it's not like going to change anything. It's not going to change the big thing. It can be, these things can be huge for individual people. And I've been the recipient of them, on several occasions. It probably seemed like not a very big deal to, whoever was showing me that kindness, but was a huge deal. And that, I really, and maybe it's because I, was a Boy Scout. And so I got this lead by example thing, drilled into me. But I really think that that's what we need more of, because we have so many people, like our whole society, all of like, media is just people setting bad examples basically for how to be a greedy celebrity. This is what we're, and we need more good examples. And so, I do really believe in the, in the power of that. And yeah, so I personally think the personal transformation thing is a big fundamental aspect of it. But yeah, it does, get turns into, again, can seek to siloize this, but if we go about it like, the way that like the people at Compersia are thinking about it, again, it becomes a solidarity thing. It's like, no, I need to transform, right? Like I recognize that our society is sick, and there's no way that I came up in it and I'm not sick, like that I haven't been affected by it, and you have too. And we need each other. So like, let's help each other, get over this and, transform ourselves. And so, making it a solidaristic endeavor in and of itself. Um,
Yeah. One thing I would like to see more of, and I think that there's beyond, like, I agree, I'm with you, Josh, about the self-transformation. I think it's important too. I think that we really should focus on care work more heavily than we do, in a lot of our groups. But um, I also would love to see on the escape side of things, like I have this smash within me, like I have that wanting to smash the state, like outlook, but I don't feel like you can without the escape, like I feel like you need some kind of dual power kind of thing going on. um and I would love to see a lot more done on like local community self-determination and self-sufficiency, just trying to get local cooperative systems that are locally self-sufficient happening, which is a big task. But um, I like, I guess, in Gandhian economics, the Sarvodaya, like the doing self-reliance locally so that you don't have to rely, like in that case, that the Indian people don't have to rely on the British Empire. Like I would love for us to not have to rely on the empire here. Like that's I would love to be more part of something like that myself.
I can't see the. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead,
Chris,
man.
go ahead.
Oh, all right, hold
No,
on.
no, you go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see the self transformation as ever being like a self thing. A lot of things you mentioned, Josh, it doesn't seem like it's just a self transformation because it's inherently takes on this communal aspect. At least the way that Josh is talking about it. And one thing that I wish people would see more is how like direct action shouldn't just be conceived as acts of disruption or acts of violence or like fighting. Um, in that direct action pamphlet by I don't know how to say his name, Emile Pouget. I like one of the things that he was getting at about like the essential nature of direct action, and I think part of what he said was that like action that keeps us from going stale, from being content with like what we're dealing with, to help us to stay in motion, do new things, try things out, stay alive, don't get used to this. And yeah, so I think like a lot of the stuff that Josh mentions, I would call that meaningful direct action, especially where you help other people out, but also maybe this is like a current structural thing, but I do think that those moments where you're like by yourself too, working on yourself, are pretty important, especially if like we're I think there's a lot of relationships where you probably can't be leaning on people too much. Like there's some sort of balance where there's work that you got to do by yourself. You got to think by yourself, like what you're doing, why you did it. Because it can't, I think there's joy when you're able to help certain people work with certain things, but you can't always do it. And I think there's a certain amount of self that people gotta work on and also develop. Um, I think one problem that I see a lot is, I can't prove it, but I suspect that I will end up being right as I gain experience. I think there's problems of what I call hypo selflessness. Like a lot of people don't have a sense of self developed. And I think that's one reason why a lot of us get exploited so much. Like I see this in the like Mexican community, the brown community with the nonprofits. Especially if they got like this religious thing to it. There's this sense of like, oh, you gotta sacrifice. You gotta sacrifice. And sacrifice is good, I think. I know there are a lot of people who don't like the idea of sacrifice, but I think that if we're trying to think within um, with the values of like restraints and limits, which I think are good values, that we should restrain ourselves. We should have limits. Um, there's certain ideas of sacrifice that I think are really good. Um, but yeah, a lot of people they get so exploited and abused by their employer because they're expected to sacrifice. It's all about the cause. But you also see that in other things too, in political groups that are radical, um, that are even like the anarchist groups that are supposed to be explicitly against this type of stuff. They still replicate this kind of stuff. Not all, of course, but something I see, and I think, yeah, I think that working on the self is so important to develop that sense of self, so you have something to take care of. But also, like, I think one thing that I see is when people don't have a sense of self, like that's one way in which uh, power just concentrates in a few people's hands, and like decisions are, everybody becomes like too many people become like how do you say, like a, is it a clack, is that the term? Everybody becomes like yes people, people like turn their brains off. They're just waiting for like what the few leaders are gonna say, which to me that's really bad. Compare that to like a meeting where there's a lot of people who, in my opinion, they have a sense of self, and like the confidence and creativity that brings, because they've experimented and messed up and recovered, got back on their feet, tried different things. Like those meetings are exciting when people have like a sense of self. Like I feel like everybody's way stronger. Um, yeah, but that's what came to mind as we were talking about the personal transformation. Check.
Mm-hmm. Matt, did you want to? You had something?
Um, well, just related to escape, but I think what Chris is talking about, that really is crucial. It's interesting. One of the things that I was first, when I started to read Arismendi Arrieta's writings, that I didn't know about a lot about the history of Catholicism. So the whole personalist movement was something that wasn't familiar to me, but was a big deal for Arismendi Arrieta. So the idea that the development of people's sense of self as a person, and the personhood was a social identity. It wasn't just a individual, atom. It was like very much a social thing. But the fact that you were a person and had, including that you had a certain, there was an emphasis on personal property that was very interesting. It struck me as I was a little surprised, like, wow, wait, what's going on here? We're talking about cooperatives. But he was very, Arismendi Arrieta and other people were very, very concerned by and opposed to collectivism in the sense of a collectivism that assimilates everybody into the board, basically, into like a mass identity or a mass function, anything that denies the person aspect. So that personhood thing, the personalism piece seems like, yeah, I felt like, oh, was an important insight to me. About escape though, I wanted to mention like a couple of years ago, I guess I read I read two books, one about the Maroon societies in the United States and another about the Quilombos and Mocambos in Brazil and basically all through the Americas. And my kind of simplistic image of what those communities were was in the 1700s. These were groups of uh, enslaved people who escaped and recreated these sort of mixed African communities. And they just went, escaped and went way into the jungle and were living this completely separate experience until the Portuguese came to conquer them. But the reality, it turns out, is way more interesting, which is these were huge communities in some cases, and they lasted for a long time. Like the famous one, Palmares, was like a series of villages in Brazil that lasted for 90, 100 years. It's like, think about that's, I mean, how many towns came and went in that time period. This is really kind of, and it really functioned like a city state, and it had all kinds of economic relations with the surrounding colonial economy, even though it was at war with them. So it just really blew my mind. The Maroon societies in the United States were often really close to the plantations, like geographically close, because the economy depended on getting resources from the plantations. There was a whole lot of exchange and interaction. So it sort of made me, I think the escape image needs to be, I mean, history is good for challenging that a little bit. Like, I don't think escape means this kind of ideal scenario of somehow complete separation. It's more just kind of a autonomous, self-organized engagement with the system. Like you're dealing with the system, but you're dealing with it on your terms.
Yeah, like the Zapatistas, kind of, huh?
Yeah, yeah, right. That's a sort of a
I mean,
similar thing. Like
they're
it's
still
a
dealing with
balance.
the authorities, but yeah.
I like escape.
Yeah.
I like escape where it's kind of like a tactical retreat, or however you
Yeah.
want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
Gather your forces.
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's a real thing. It's a real thing. You get far enough away and in a safe enough place that they can't easily attack you. They can't easily stop you.
mm-hmm.
That's really crucial. And at the same time, it doesn't mean that you're separated or disconnected or whatever. Like so that's fascinating to me, how those two things are related.
No, yeah, and I mean, and escape maybe doesn't Like I guess we think like the escape. I do kind of tend to think like Zapatista is like that kind of to that
Mm.
degree. Um, but thinking about more, there's lots of ways that we can you know escape from some aspect of the destructive system that we despise, and help other people do that. Like through things like tool libraries, or I mean,
Mm.
things like that can be seen as a form of escape. Like if I'm able to get a need met through some non-market, non-capitalist mechanism, like I've escaped from that, that part of the system. Maybe that's the
Mm-hmm.
I can't escape from all of it, but a little at a time.
Yeah, I got two things I'm getting ready to donate to the Chicago Tool Library. It's I really don't
Nice.
go, but it is nice to have somewhere where I can at least donate the stuff, and I know that it's gonna probably go to some good use.
Mm-hmm.
It's not gonna just. I'm hoping they're not just ending up being used by shitty tiny capitalists or something, but I don't think that's the case because I've probably used one or two tools from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely made use of the one in Missoula. They've got Missoula Urban Demonstration Project has got a great tool library they've been doing for probably
Mm.
15 years at this point.
The
Yeah.
tool library really came through for this dual power gathering that happened recently in Illinois. They rented a lot of
Mm.
stuff for like
Yeah.
super low price. It's actually pretty amazing because if I were to do an event, like I probably would have just been like, nah, I don't want to do it because I got to get all this stuff, and where's the money for that? Like I don't have it. I don't want to. I probably don't want to know the people who have the money for that. But it was a cool, smooth transaction with the tool
Mm-hmm.
library, and for like $20, I think it came out to really really
Yeah.
Wow.
low. So
Yeah. Yeah.
if anybody's curious about how that stuff works out, I didn't. It might really. Maybe that's what the movement locally needs to a library to help get access to these things that you need for events and stuff to build stuff up. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, library of everything, I mean, not
Mm.
just tools, but I mean, I think, and maybe this kind of ties together everything a little bit with the personal transformation piece. Um, but like the extreme power of sharing, that's definitely one thing that really struck me when I was staying at the Ganas community on Staten Island, um, was that, you got 80 people there, most of whom low income, like they are maybe working at the secondhand clothing store that the community owns or something, and they don't get paid like in cash very much, but you're wealthy. You are a wealthy person if you live there. You got washing machines, dryer, you got a pool table, a private pool table. You've got vehicles that you can use. You have you know 4 different houses you can hang out in the living rooms. It's amazing. You have access to so much stuff, right? And you don't need to have money to get it. And it's like mind blowing, somebody who's not used to like not having money and therefore not having access to stuff. And it's like, oh my God, we can have access to this stuff. We just have to learn to share, right? Like what our parents always told us when we were kids, like, hey, you should
Mhm.
share. Like they were right. Like, and when we grew up and they told us, hey, you shouldn't do that anymore because you need to think about yourself, like they were wrong. Like we should still be sharing. And this is the kind of thing where I think like there's a lot of power that we have that we're unaware of because we don't think about like, oh man, if we just like instead of everybody like try to figure out how everybody can have a high enough salary so that they can buy their
Mm.
own washing machine and their own dryer and their own drill and
Mm.
their own table saw. It's like we
Yeah.
could share all this stuff and then we don't have to worry about trying to get everybody a higher salary, that doesn't. And so I really think that
Yeah.
is could be really that's where it's at, is the sharing, and not the sharing economy
Nick,
nonsense, like actual sharing. I mean,
Nick,
tool library is about as much money transfer as I'll allow and call it sharing anyway. Sorry.
Yeah, I would love to see personally, like beyond like the workplace, I'm very much interested in alternatives in like the home economy, the and like broadening the family to the community. Like, I like the idea of living in an income sharing commune. And I like the idea that of like, oh shoot, I'm forgetting her name. The woman who started the settlement movement. She she had a saying. Um, she talked about municipal homemaking, basically like expanding the like homemaking to your neighborhood, right? Like I like the idea of that. Like I think that there's so much that we are missing by just focusing on the workplace, right? Like I feel like I want to live in a place where I know my neighbors and we can count on each other. I mean that's a that's the kind of alternative and escape that I can hope for myself.
Hmm.
All right.
Yeah, I mean
Well,
those people. I think those people exist a lot. They're not like the hegemony, and probably a lot of the socialists and anarchists and contribute to this by not highlighting that stuff exists. Because I think I'm seeing that right now with a lot of people who are helping a lot of the migrants and new arrivals in Chicagoland. My sense is a lot of them are homemakers. It's not just people who have like IT jobs or can work from home.
Yeah.
And they're already doing this, and it's more a matter of how to expand this, or how to stop repressing it, or how to stop how to sidestep the repression of this natural tendency. Because I think it is a natural thing that's going on, but it's just not publicized enough.
And that was Jane Addams. I couldn't think of her name.
Yeah.
Jane Addams started the settlement movement. She was one of the kind of founders of sociology as we know it, and she was one of the founding members of the NAACP too. So yeah,
Yeah. Her house is in Chicago. The original.
yep,
It's a
that's where
great
she did.
museum. It's a
Yep,
great
exactly
museum
right.
to
Yeah,
visit. It's very cool. It's funny. She was Lucy Parsons, the biography of Lucy Parsons that came out recently talked about. Lucy Parsons did not have a lot of great things to say about Jane Addams. They were on
yeah, I
they
was
were
gonna
on a
say,
very different wavelength. But
and Lucy Parsons.
but
I think
it's
she was
funny to
something
read,
else.
and you're kind of like, oh wow, okay, that's some different takes. One thing that I feel like was a little bit of a light bulb for me was we went to this Canadian Cooperative Studies Conference in June in Toronto, and they did a couple of, there were some interesting things. One thing is that the conference really centered the experience of BIPOC women and immigrant women in a way that really I was impressed by. Like, it wasn't just lip service. It was like the actual conference was centered on these experiences and what people's concerns were. And that's who was talking and organizing a lot of the events. So it had a very interesting impact. But one thing was that people really stressed the importance of interdependency and especially the kind of vulnerability side of that. That like it's one thing sharing, like give. A hard part of sharing for a lot of people is asking or being even ready to
Mm-hmm.
receive. And so there's that great saying from the disability movement of the more people you have to depend on, the more independent you are. And I feel like that kind of registered for me when I was at that conference because I feel like the banker ladies and some of these other organizing initiatives are really about like, yeah, like we were saying, Josh, it's not about the individual gets wealthy and gets all the resources they need to control their life and be safe somehow that way and be independent. It's like, no, they build these really intense networks of mutual support. And that's
and mutual
you have to
dependence, right?
open yourself up. You got to ask for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not easy, I think, in our culture.
No, it is something to
Yeah.
be to carefully navigate though. Like there's this one time we're gonna have this event, and somebody proposed bringing some local gangs in for protection, and then the women were like, no, no, because then we're gonna owe them
Right.
something, and then they don't have a good track record of being respectful to women. Um, and
Right.
so that's something I think about too. Like, man, I do not want to owe that person something. Not just gangs, but all sorts of people.
Yeah.
But there's other people I'm like, oh man, I would love to owe them something. Like, I love going to their place. Like,
Hmm.
and I think people should not be afraid of that reality, and like lean into it, because maybe it's because you have some terrible things you got to deal with, or maybe you might be right about some things. But I think
Hmm.
we really hurt things when we're not honest about some of those feelings. Like, lean into it. Take that time to think about it.
So I wonder, Abe, do you feel like the conversation so far is getting at what is scratching that itch that you had that made you want to have this conversation? Like,
Yeah, the thing that I also think about is like I I, I sometimes have this kind of internal conversation with me now and me and the younger me. Though I was much more like I was much more leaning on the Smash as a younger me, um, and yeah, and I think I get a little frustrated in a lot of groups, right? Like when we're talking about change, like people will I think there's a part of me in me that someone says, oh, worker co-ops are intrinsically anti-capitalist because the workers have gained the means of production, and you don't have that class conflict. I'm like, no, like that doesn't resonate with me. Like we haven't. Yes, it maybe it's anti-capitalist in like the way that like people are anti-racist. They're doing the work to fight racism. They haven't like achieved getting rid of racism, right? Um, but like there are so many. But worker co-ops are not intrinsically anti-capitalist. A lot of worker cooperatives see themselves as capitalist. So I
hmm,
really, yeah, I really would like to be part of an effort that is something that is trying to do something that is personally transformative and transform to the community beyond, I don't know, beyond what nonprofits are doing, like handing out food to people when they need food, but like, changing things to a significant degree that we're not doing our little corner over here, but we are showing something that has a cumulative, like it has a whirlwind effect. It's creating a movement of change. That's what I hope to be part of at some point.
I think one big challenge for that is, this is the way, maybe you guys can tell me. This is sort of a story I tell myself. I don't know if it's correct or useful, but I sort of see for me, the solidarity economy concept and storyline is very much a sort of post 20th century socialist politics concept. And the 20th century is all about kind of one form or another of seizing state power. So it's all about subordinating everything to the political goal of gaining state power. And the plus side of that politics was that it was very consciously political, and it understood you had to have big you had to have huge capacity of collective action because you were going against states, you're going against governments and militaries, and so you had to have this real tremendous capacity. So if you were going to go that path, it forced you to deal with questions and issues on a scale that a co-op doesn't force you to think about. And solidarity economy, I think, doesn't force you to think about it either. It can be a good space for thinking about how to challenge the system in practical terms about actually, like, what would it take to stop Exxon from destroying the planet, right? Like, you need power because they have an awful lot of power and they're not going to stop. So that building the collective power and having the organization required to function on the scale to fight an Exxon is complicated. So I think it's I don't feel like solidarity economy writers or theorists have done a great job of explaining how political power can be challenged in that framework. It's a more of a vision of kind of what is the type of society we want, and then also the prefigurative thing. What things can we do now that are like the society that we want? But I still wonder, like, where's the strategy for collective power capable of overthrowing the people who are really going to destroy us because they are determined to do so.
I think that a lot of people in the solidarity economy work also do have different visions of what that's going to look like in the future. And I think that if we're going to do just like the mission statement for like a co-op, right? Like if you can have a vision, but then you need to come up with, you know, what are you offering, like your value proposition and your business model, and then your strategy and your goals and how you get all the things of like what is the end goal and how to get there, right? Like it's not just enough to say, oh, we're anti-capitalist. Like what is it specifically that our organizing is aiming towards, and then the strategy to get there, I mean, we're talking about, if we're talking about social change and systemic change, I mean, it's not an easy topic. It's not easy. These aren't easy questions, but I think they're important ones.
And yet, the whole concept, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Matt, but doesn't the concept of solidarity economy and social solidarity economy stem from the Central and South American countries, people down there?
I mean, as far as I know it, I have not gotten the sense that there's universal agreement about this, but generally speaking, it seems to be the case that yes, it comes from sort of the Latin American experience. As I think I mentioned, well, just like to mention like Luis Rossetto was like one of the origin stories is the one that Luis Rossetto tells and why he started talking about solidarity economy. He's definitely one of the first people to write about it, but was he the only person who came up with the term? I kind of doubt it.
But I guess I was just going to say that, like in those like South American countries, like as much as any other part of the world, have actually had some success in getting like leftists in government power, right? So, and and the concept of buen vivir, and that seems to have a very like pretty political focus. It's not just about like prefigurative politics, but like actual policies today that we want implemented, right? So
I guess, but I think it's pretty confused and pretty messy.
Okay. Yeah.
So like in Chile, they had a huge referendum about changing their constitution, and it failed. And it's kind of like, and that's an interesting puzzle. Like, how on earth did this fail, given that it was overthrowing the dictatorship constitution, right? Like the constitution of the dictators was what they were challenging, and yet they couldn't overturn it because there's still the political organizing question is still very messy and still it's still very much a 20th century model of politics that people are using, and So there isn't a. I don't think there is a politics
Yeah.
of the solidarity economy.
Okay.
People doing interesting stuff, but I don't think there's a
Mm-hmm.
coherent sort of. And it's an interesting problem.
Yeah, I mean, you make me think, Matt. I've had this thought just about kind of leftist politics and how it seems to me to have like there's not a whole lot when most of like our like the political dialogue seems to not be focused on actual material issues, right? Like it is not focused around bread and butter kind of things. It's more not enough people of color in high positions in corporate America. It's laws about LGBT people, which is bread and butter issues on some those people, but it's things like healthcare and stuff like that. And I was just wondering like why it seems like the left has kind of abandoned largely a lot of the kind of economic things and seems to settle often for very small victories. In my social.coop profile, I put that Amilcar Cabral quote in there because I hoping that somebody will read it, and think like, oh, right, we're not supposed to claim easy victories. Like that's a bad thing to do. And it seems like we do that a lot on the left. And
Yeah.
I think, maybe what's caused that is just we've had so little success. Like I'm 44 and I can't think of a single
Yeah.
success, like material success in my lifetime. It's like the civil rights movement, right? I guess gay marriage, but again, that's I mean, I
No,
was
that makes
working
sense.
for I was working for a gay woman at the time that was all in the national media at the school bus company at my college, and she was actually opposed to gay marriage. She was like, "That's straight people. That is a waste of time." So it was like not even something that the gay people I was supposed weren't even on board with. And so, but I don't know. It seems like there's something to me. It's like we haven't been successful getting like what we really want, and so we're kind of just end up settling for a lot of other things. And maybe it's the same thing with the solidarity economy stuff. We don't really believe that we can actually like take power and like force changes. And so it's like, well, I guess we'll do our prefigurative stuff, and maybe that's all we can do. But I don't know. And when it comes to talking about actually like taking power in the state system, um, I mean, I think that gets into a whole. I almost think that's maybe different types of people who are going to be attracted to solidarity economics versus really thinking strategically and tactically about how you take state power. Like that's a like I don't think anybody has those real like serious conversations about that definitely not in the solidarity economy movement.
No, I think that the solidarity economy folks, I mean, and the people that I look at or I'm familiar with or whatever, like I'm thinking mostly of Luis Rossetto just because that's where I've been focused. But uh, he, yeah, there is, generally speaking, there is a kind of resistance to traditional politics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, people are interested in Buen Vivir and these other movements precisely because they're not, to the degree they're not traditional politics. That's what interests
Right.
people.
Yeah.
But there's a way in which some of that is just kind of not being a kind of abstentionism, right? It's just like just try to stay the hell out of it, which I think is one reason why that Chile referendum
Mm-hmm.
failed, because there's just a kind of
Right.
general distrust and disengagement. So it creates kind of a problem. It's not a straightforward thing. The other thing is, I don't know. Have you seen the movie Judas and the Black Messiah?
I have
About Fred
not. I've
Hampton?
only listened to people
Yeah.
critique it. So
Oh, interesting. I should look at some critiques. I just saw it, and one of the
mm-hmm.
things that I found fascinating was Fred Hampton they stage this thing where a woman introduces Fred Hampton, and she's talking about some piece of legislation that just got passed or some rule that was changed in their college or whatever. And Fred Hampton gets up and he's like, yeah, nice. You got a little building on your campus named after Medgar Evers or whatever. And he's like, they can do that for you. They can make those changes for you just to keep everything exactly the way it is. And he comes into this very like harsh critique of things that are just, palliative, that aren't really changing the basic relations of power. And I thought, and it's that piece of critique seems very powerful. The sort of strategy that the film projects of sort of how the Panthers operated in terms of the larger strategy, which is revolutionary seizure of power, seemed to be not particularly helpful, even though it's tied to a radical rejection, but it still also seemed like wildly disproportionate to what their capacity was. And then the focus on the practical work was, of course, like clearly everybody recognized this was really, really important. Clinics and education programs and food programs. This was a big deal. So I don't know, that I found it like a kind of interesting example of like, something similar to what you're describing. Like, are you just going to focus on getting buildings' names changed so that the system can just keep rolling along as it is?
Right.
Where sorry, I left. But what were you? What area were you talking about, Matt? And you don't have to repeat it.
Oh, this was the I just saw the film Judas and the Black Messiah about Fred Hampton.
Oh, okay.
And William, whatever his face is, the guy who betrayed him.
Okay.
I think beyond racial inequities and economic inequities and everything like that too, climate disruption is going to have its own thing with, a lot of scientists have coastal cities underwater in our lifetime, as predictions,
Yeah.
And so New York City is no longer functioning like we need to know how to work together, in those times. And that's that one does scare me a lot. But yeah, I mean, I think that these things might, the people who know how to organize together are going to be at an advantage over other people, in my book.
Right now,
sure.
right now, there's a lot of folks coming from Venezuela into Chicago. And one conversation I had, it was last year though. I was talking to a Venezuelan I was talking to him in San Antonio, Texas. He was asking me for bus directions, and I was helping him figure it out. And I asked him why he left Venezuela. And he gave me a really spooky answer. He said because it stopped raining, and so he couldn't do farm work anymore.
Oh shit!
That was like the scariest. That's one of the scariest things I've ever heard in my life. And so I'm wondering how many others might be climate change refugees. If right, of course, some scientists say don't attribute any weather phenomenon immediately to climate change. It could be something that's going to happen already, but who knows?
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah, and I mean we're definitely. We already have climate, refugees. My folks used to live up in Alaska, and there's islands up there and one just recently had to be entirely evacuated because just sea level rise that we've already had. Yeah, I mean, the environmental aspect that to me gets to another, part of like the personal transformation or just the like thinking it like our mindsets, like this kind of issue and how our mindsets are maybe hindering us from doing what we need to do. Like, I've thought about the metaphor. It's like, okay, we're on the Titanic, right? And it seems like we haven't decided amongst ourselves, can we still steer away from the iceberg? Should we be trying to like go get control of the rudder to steer away from the, can we just barely miss it, or are we definitely going to hit it? Because if those, which situation is going to make a big difference, or have we already hit it? Right. Like, and we don't necessarily agree where we're at. Like, I think we've already hit it. And so our discussions about who gets to have the good deck chairs, and all those kind of conversations, completely irrelevant. And it's about how are we, who gets in the life raft. How are we keeping those rich fucks out of the life rafts? Or, to be too crude about it. How, we need to start tearing, we don't need to be worrying about who gets to have the nice, spot on the deck. We need to be tearing the deck apart and building rafts out of it, like right now,
There
like
you
that
go.
kind of
There,
thing,
now we're talking.
And so, but it feels like to me, and just, from my own, acquaintances and people, a lot of people, especially in the more like kind of liberal mainstream part of things, are not convinced that we've hit the iceberg, or even that like we're definitely going to hit it. Like they still think like, okay, and like, so that radical change in my lifestyle is not going to be necessary. And I think like, no, radical change in all of our lifestyles is coming, whether we want it or not. And what we should be doing, I think, is John Michael Greer coined the term. He said, collapse now and avoid the rush. And I think that's what it's, that kind of change in mindset of like, okay, we're not saving this thing. We're not fixing it. I'm not going to get to have all my modern conveniences that I just don't know how I can live without. We're just not. So let's figure it out right now and start.
I have a controversial question about Titanic. Do you think Jack could have also survived? Because I think we're going to come across this.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
We're going to come across this as well. This false dichotomy. Is Jack or Rose? I think it could have been both. Supposedly, like the director or something did research and proved
now we're getting to the meat of the discussion here.
Mythbusters, they had their take on it, but
yeah, I actually never seen the film.
It's very political. If that scene that I'm talking about, depending on where you're at, that might frustrate you. You might flip a table.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Josh's thing, like, let's tear up the deck and start making some boats. Like I love that, because that's the thing, right? It's not, let's not just assume there's a limited number of life rafts, so therefore we're going to have to screw each other. It's like, no, wait a minute. We can have the capacity to make more. Like, if you knew,
let's share doors.
If you had any time, man, start tearing shit down and making rafts.
Right. And but it's this mindset thing, and we don't, like, if we're not there, if we're convinced like, no, there's some possible future in which we don't have to change our lifestyles all that much. We just kind of like, we get some new energy source that takes care of everything that oil's been doing for us. And so, and if you think that's a possibility, and so, it's comforting to think that, I think, for a lot of people. And so that, means, well, you don't need to do anything too radical. So it's like, well, you get over that mindset, like, oh no, the excrement is already hitting the oscillator, as it were. It's and I don't know, I'm probably, I'm privileged in that I'm single, I'm childless, and apparently have a high tolerance for personal risk. So, but it's easy for me to say, like, okay, like we make radical changes, and why are we trying to do all the same stuff? Because I don't have that much to lose, and whatever, and I don't have other people depending on me to feed them and stuff like that. But which is why, again, I think nonetheless, it may be easier for somebody like me to talk about this and maybe try some of it than other folks, but nonetheless, we all need to be doing it. And again, that's why we need each other. We need to be doing it in groups, because that's once again, the more people you have to depend on, the more freedom you have, right? I mean, that's what I think. Like, again, this was a thought experiment. Again, my econ, like my senior econ seminar, like they all thought I was a freaking nutball. So it's like, would you prefer to live in a society? This is related to I talked about last week or something, or last month. But would you prefer to live in a society where, it's every person takes care of themselves, or would you prefer to live in a society where nobody is concerned with taking care of themselves? Everybody is just like concerned themselves with taking care of everybody else, right? Like obviously the second one is a better,
Right.
even from a completely selfish standpoint, I would rather live in that second one, because now I've got like billions of people, everybody that I see is, has my best interest at heart, instead of just one person, little old me.
Yeah.
And so it's like getting over, changing our mindset, so we can start tearing the deck apart, making some
Tearing the deck
rafts.
apart. Put those deck chairs on our rafts so we have somewhere to sit.
Yeah.
All kinds of ideas.
Well, we're at an hour and a half here.
Yeah, it's a good place to.
That's a good
Probably wrap it up.
conversation. Thank you.
My cat is, I think he's decided he's not getting dinner and he's just gone to look for it someplace else. So I should probably
geo.coop/donate.
Yes, if you would like to make a
Oh yeah,
donation,
thank you, Chris.
go to geo.coop/donate. Yeah. And we will see you again next month.
Next month.
All right.
Right on.
All right.
Take care, y'all.